Bom dia a todos. Vamos iniciar a videoconferência da Lojas Renner S.A.
Good morning, everyone. We're going to begin the conference call for Renner S.A. So we have
no Rio Grande do Sul.
because of this situation in Rio Grande do Sul. So with me, I have Fabio Faccia, our CEO, and Danielle Santos, our CFO, has connected from São Paulo. Before I hand over to them, will make some announcements. This conference is being recorded and simultaneously translated, and the presentation will be shown in Portuguese. However, the presentation in English is available. The link is available in the chat. The questions from the press can be sent to our press relations at 11-3165-9686. And before we continue, I'd like to mention that any statements made according to forecasts, goals, are beliefs and assumptions based on information currently available, and it depends on circumstances that may or may not occur. During the Q&A, the questions may be asked by audio or chat. With that, over to you, Fabio. Thank you, Carla. Good morning, everyone. Before I begin our earnings presentation, I would like to express my deepest sympathies to the hundreds of lives lost in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, and also offer our solidarity to the thousands of families that have been affected, and thank our entire team for their efforts and everyone that is somehow helping in such a sad and challenging moment for all the people in Rio Grande do Sul. We're endeavoring our efforts with this chain of solidarity. Since the beginning, we've had a dedicated team to welcome, flexibilize, and assist our employees that live in locations that were affected. And in addition, through the Institute Lojas Renner, our social arm, we have coordinated actions with entities and official agencies to rescue and assist the communities that were affected. We continue to articulate partnerships with other entities and companies to increase the power of the cooperation in our state. Now it's time for us to come together and support and take care of each other. And for those who are interested, we've published on social media some of the examples of the actions that we have conducted so far to support the people that have been affected. If you are interested in helping, our stores are operating to collect donations as well. We have the official bank account of the state if you'd like to make your donations in money. And we also assist companies outside the state that would like to help and don't know how. And we will continue to help to rebuild this amazing state. So based on the operational point of view, during the more critical moment, we have approximately 2% of the total units of the company that are completely closed. At the worst time, it was 4%, up to yesterday it was 3%. Now it's 2% of the total of stores closed. It's also important to note that we do not have distribution centers in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, and the impact in product supply coming from our partner network is not material. The actual impact is in traffic in the stores in the state. So we are all working together for the state, and we're counting on your support for our state as well. I'd like to hand over to Daniel so we can talk about our results for 1Q24. Thank you, Fabio. Good morning, everyone. Let's start by talking about our sales performance. The first quarter had a consistent performance during the entire period. We had growth that was anchored by the increase in transactions, meaning number of tickets, and number of pieces, and growth in all our businesses. When we consider apparel alone in Brazil, we had an increase of 9% performance, greater than the year-to-date PMC. So we had good performance in the transition collection, assertive products, followed by the increase in the traffic in the stores. And that's a reflection of the marketing and competitive efforts that we've had and that we've been mentioning in the past interactions that we've had with many of you. It's worth noting that there's still the impact of stabilizing the distribution center as well as the credit side that in a way limits our sales potential. Now looking at our divisions and our business units, we have a growth of 8% year over year. There's adjustments in the collection transitions. Camicado has a growth of 6% year over year, a highlight of the revenue per square meter that grew approximately 17%, a result of the continuous operational and commercial evolution and all the changes we made in the period, and many of them that we've been mentioning during our conversation. Our digital channel had a growth of 12.8% greater than the company average, with an increase of the customer base, more visits, and we continue to gain efficiency and profitability in the digital operation. Now moving on to margin evolution. The gross margin in retail increased year over year because of the combination of costs, more balanced exchange rate, and a collection that even though we had to adjust the entry-level prices with more suitable prices and others, we have these prices are in line with historical levels. So we have collection being developed and bought in season, brought on more flexibility to the operation, and that in addition to the efforts in releasing older inventories and making the collection fresher, led to a reduction of 22 days of inventory and the financial amount of inventory that's 9% lower year over year. In SG&A, the participation or the share of SG&A on the revenues in retail is relevant, especially a reflection of the leverage that we had given the higher volume sold and more efficiency in expense control that had a nominal growth at lower levels than compared to inflation in the period. There are 2 points that I would like to mention. That one of them is that across 2023, we had some structure adjustments that made us have additional expenses compared to the previous year that are non-recurrent. Second, the additional expenses of the distribution center in São Paulo had an ascending curve in 2023. So the expenses in 1Q24 are still higher than the ones incurred in 23. And our expectation is that across the second half, we will see a reduction in the non-recurring expenses compared to the previous year. About our new supply model or replenishment model and distribution center is continuing in the stabilization process. We're progressing, but it's putting pressure not only on cost, as I mentioned before, but also at the level of services and the service in stores. So we're also affecting our sales potential. The normalization and its impacts are inherent into the process of change. And we continue to work to normalize this in the second half and that we can collect the benefits and all of the advantages that this new model will have for the company. The digital channel is still gaining efficiency with a reduction of 2.1 percentage points in the share of expenses in the channel. For the 11th consecutive quarter, we've been positively evolving in the profitability of our digital channel. Main highlight going to the CAC. Other operating results have grown, especially regarding the effects in the period, but it was neutralized based on the profit sharing program results. Now moving on to Realize, our financial institution. The total portfolio had a drop year over year as a result of the reduction of the past due portfolio that had a 16% reduction and lower volume transacted in the cards and less cards that are fit for consumption, given the credit restrictions that was implemented in the past quarters. If we analyze the paid portfolio, the reduction was 3.5%. Revenues for the quarter had a reduction, a result of a portfolio with a better credit risk profile. And now in March, 93% of customers were approved that had minimum or low level of risk, compared to 79% year over year. But the net losses presented a significant reduction of 24% year over year as a result of all of the measures that were adopted in granting, maintaining, and collection that improves the risk profile and resulted in a lower need to provision losses. There was also greater credit recovery as a result of the active collection efforts in the Realize team. Operating expenses, on the other hand, grew year over year, especially in non-recurring with contracts with third parties. We had 22 million BRL in improving the credit and collection process, which was a non-recurring amount. By adjusting that amount, the total Realize results was approximately 35 million BRL. That's the operating result. An important evolution result of all the efforts to contain the risks in the portfolio that makes us more confident in going back to origination and offering credit gradually in second quarter and the second half of the year. Now, a little more about the portfolio indicators at Realize. Some of the points that I would like to highlight. First of all, we continue to present an improvement in the NPL 90 days that was lower than 1Q23 and 4Q23. Over 90 presented a reduction of 1 percentage point year over year and 1 percentage point quarter over quarter, reflecting the measures adopted to improve the quality of credit in the portfolio. The new vintages still have good quality. We've observed an improvement from 1 to 60 days year over year. We always have a seasonal effect of the first quarter compared to the fourth quarter, but we still see an evolution in the quality of the shorter term portfolio that makes us feel confident regarding the credit risk that we're carrying in our portfolio. Now moving on to EBITDA and net income. Total adjusted EBITDA had a growth year over year, given the better performance in credit and retail. We had an increase of 4.3 percentage points to the margin. Free cash flow generation of 197 million, mainly resulting from the higher operating results, better management of working capital. As a consequence of the better operating performance, we had net income with significant growth of almost 200% year over year. Better financial results also contributed towards these results. We had 33 million in monetary collection from Argentina and 16 million of interest on tax credits. Notwithstanding the subvention amounts in the year-over-year comparison has also affected the total results of the net income. Now handing back over to Fabio, and then we can begin the Q&A session. Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. I'd like to mention a little bit about our future expectations. So we continue to evolve in the main strategic projects that are essential to position us ahead in this segment and become increasingly more the reference in fashion and lifestyle, enchanting experiences, and responsible fashion. That's something that we've been working on and we've been bringing to you since last year when we presented the first Q of 23. and also during the investor day. So within the same strategy, the same sequence here. And in the past quarters, we've had some adjustment in investments to make Renner increasingly more competitive, ready for the new cycle of growth and gaining profitability. And in this first quarter, even with the pressure in the moment of transition, we've already seen the beginning of the results of this work. We know that the scenario still brings on challenges, but we're stronger, prepared, and sure about our capability of enchanting customers and gaining market share, generating value for our shareholders, employees, and customers. We have a cash position of 2.4 billion BRL, which is a differential to compete in the current scenario. And that's how we go in and advance into the second quarter. We believe in the continuity of sales that is leveraged by pieces, by high volume. And we also had an expectation of a second quarter with a similar growth to the first quarter. However, the extreme climate events that we've been feeling since April make this expectation even more challenging, probably a pressure to our sales lines in the second quarter, but still with value generation, results generation, and about the expectations for the year, they continue positive, and we see that as a one-off effect in the current context. So we're also well prepared for Mother's Day event this week and also subsequent events that we will have during the quarter. Our inventory is adjusted and renewed. So even with adverse events, we can work with an increasing gross margin and with more efficiency. So digital continues to evolve in this front, and the operations are leaner, digital is more profitable with a better level of service. And as Daniel already mentioned, we're in the final phase of the stabilization project for the new supply model. So it's still putting pressure on our results, not only in cost, but also service levels at the store. And therefore, it did drop in the past quarter, our potential of sales that could have been higher. After the transition, it will be, and it will be a lever for those results. But right now, it's putting pressure not only in sales, but also in cost. And after the second quarter, especially, it will be a positive lever in that sense, in cost reduction and increasing sales and margin. The effect and the pressure at this moment in the first quarter and fourth quarter and during the second half is natural in a migration when you consider how big it is. It's not just migrating the DC, it's an entire supply model. So we continue to work at the end phase of normalizing the distribution center, and we already expect very positive results during the second half. The distribution center will enable us to have an integrated supply model in between the channels with potential to transform our business. It enables us to have more granularity per store, per SKU that no other operator has. And it also enables us to have full integration between channels, inventory, and service. In credit, we also expect continuity of a more favorable dynamic by reducing losses and operating expenses, even though we have challenges in revenues given the low risk profile of the portfolio. So we've also reviewed our entire credit model with more attributes, qualitative attributes, and variables that will enable us to progressively and gradually flexibilize the selective offer to our customers. We've started that process in March, and we trust in Realize's evolution, and we believe it will move forward with positive results in the upcoming quarters, generating a positive contribution in retail still in 2024. It's important to note the historical seasonality of Realize, especially in between the quarters and the second and third quarters mainly. So even with all the short-term challenges, we're working towards another profitable quarter in line with 2024, where we begin to reap the benefits of our investments and reduce the expenses that were resulting from the implementation. So in a year of recovering our profitability. Now I'd like to hand over to Carla, and she'll ask
E com
us
isso a
and
gente
guide us in
inicia a
Q&A.
nossa sessão de perguntas e
And we're
respostas.
open for your Q&A. So now we
Lembrando
begin the
que o
Q&A
fazer as
session.
perguntas pode ser tanto levantando
So
a
you
mão
can ask your
através do
questions
botão de
by
Zoom,
raising your
ou
hand,
pode também ser por escrito no
clicking
botão de perguntas.
on the icon, or you
Recomendo que as
can
perguntas
write
todas sejam feitas
your
de uma só
questions
vez,
down in the
até
Q&A
para
session. Please
poupar
ask
mais
all your
tempo.
questions at once when you're
E vou
called.
iniciar aqui então pelas perguntas
So I'd like to
que são
start
por áudio.
with the
E a primeira
questions
pergunta, ela vem do
that
Thiago
will be
Macruz,
asked in person. The
do
first one is
Itaú
from
BBA.
Tiago Macruz
Tudo
from
bem,
Itaú
Macruz?
BBA. How are you
Olá,
doing, Macruz?
pessoal, bom dia.
Hi,
Eu
everyone.
tenho
Good
duas
morning.
perguntas.
I have two
Primeira
questions.
pergunta é com relação à
My
Realize.
first
Vocês,
question is
tanto o
about
Daniel quanto o
Realize.
Fábio, já
So
tocaram um pouco nesse
Daniel
assunto,
and Fabio already
mas eu
mentioned
queria
this a
entender
little,
se
but I'd like to
na opinião de
understand if,
vocês, na
in your
expectativa de
opinion,
vocês, a gente
in your
tem
expectation,
24 voltar a ver a carteira do
if
private
we will
label
see
crescendo.
the private
Isso
label
que
portfolio growing
significa,
again
eu
in
acho que o Fábio
2024. Is that
pode
what
muito
Fabio
bem
means when he's saying
ser
that
um
Realize
enabler para
will
voltar a ajudar a operação de
go back to
varejo de
being an
vocês. Então
enabler
essa é a
and
primeira
helping your
pergunta.
retail
E a segunda
operation?
pergunta,
Again,
está
that's my
super
first
claro
question.
que
My second
até o
question,
momento tem sido
it's
um
very
pouquinho
clear that the distribution
temporário,
center
né?
has been
Um
a
negócio
temporary challenge.
dessa magnitude, uma
You
mudança
know, a
desse tamanho
business,
é
something
natural que
as
isso
big as
aconteça.
that
Mas
is
talvez não
and
esteja tão claro para
that
mim, ou
big of a
para alguém que
change,
atua com
it's
vocês,
clear. I understand
o
that part.
tamanho desse
But I'd
impacto,
like to
né? Fala um
understand the
pouco em custo,
size
fala um
of
pouco
the
em venda.
impact. Is it a bit
Vocês
of
têm alguma
cost, a bit
dimensão?
in
Vocês têm
sales?
algum
Do you
tipo
have
de
any
métrica
dimension
que
on that? Do
vocês
you have any
monitoram
metrics that you're
através
monitoring
do
internally
custo
so
para nos
that you
ajudar a
could share
entender o
with us
tamanho desse
so we can
impacto? Essas são
understand
minhas
the
duas
size
perguntas.
of that
Obrigado,
impact?
pessoal.
Those are my two questions. Thank you. Good morning, Marcus. Thank you for your questions. I'll start and then I'll hand over to Daniel so he can add. About Realize, well, when we say that we've reviewed the model and we're granting credit mainly focused to consumption in our own ecosystem, so we're little by little granting a little more credit, reactivating some customers, some of the credit, but in a gradual and responsible way. Across time, that should little by little give us the growth of the private portfolio or our own consumption. That's our biggest focus. Daniel, would you like to give them more flavor about Realize before I answer the next question?
Fábio, eu acho que
Well,
esse
Fabio,
Macruz, a pergunta do
no.
Macruz aqui
And
em relação ao
Macruz,
potencial de
your
crescimento
question
da
about
Macruz,
the potential for growth, I would
poderíamos ter um
say
potencial de crescimento da carteira, sim.
we could have a potential of growing the portfolio,
Aquilo que a gente
yes,
falou, nós estamos vendo que os
but about the
últimos
dynamic,
números da
we
carteira
see
estão
that
adequados,
the
tá?
delinquency
E a
levels
gente
for the
vai começando
portfolio
a
are
ver
adequate, and
uma
we'll begin
originação,
a
tá?
movement in
A
origination.
gente, lógico que o mercado e o ambiente externo não estão
Obviously, the
garantidos,
market
né,
and the
o mais
external
adequado possível. A gente ainda vê, por
environment
exemplo,
aren't
endividamento
the
de 5
most
vezes ao ano
adequate, so we
aumentando,
see
e a
indebtedness in
gente vai
households increasing,
acompanhar essa
and
evolução para
we
poder
will monitor that
melhorar
evolution
essa
so we
oferta de
can
crédito,
calibrate
tá?
that
Acho que o
credit
potencial para a gente aumentar a
offer.
carteira de CCE,
So the
sim,
potential to
existe, tá?
increase
Mas assim, nós temos
the
aí como
credit
um
portfolio
target, como
exists for
meta?
CCR, but
Não.
is that
Nós
a
temos como
target, a
meta
goal?
e
No.
como
Our
objetivo a
objective,
gente ter
our
uma série de
goal
clientes, como o Fábio
is that we
comentou,
have
que
a number
perderam ao
of
longo
customers that Fabio
do
mentioned
passado,
that we lost
clientes que eram
during
bastante
last
fiéis à
year.
companhia,
Customers
clientes que
were
eram
loyal to the
clientes de
brand,
longa data da companhia e que
that
tiveram
were
dificuldades
long-term
financeiras e que
customers and had
infelizmente a gente
financial
acabou
difficulties.
perdendo
And
eles, né?
unfortunately,
E
we
acho que o
lost
grande
them.
objetivo nosso agora é como é que a gente resgata
And the
essa base,
biggest objective
a
now is
velocidade
how
de
we
resgate
rescue
dessa
that
base, a
base
velocidade com
and the
que a gente
speed of
começa a trabalhar
rescuing
essa
that and the
originação,
speed that we
principalmente
can
na
work on the
originação
origination,
que ela
especially
vai
because
acontecer com o private, né?
origination will
E
happen
que
with
nos permite
private
que a gente eventualmente possa fechar o
initially.
ano tendo um
It
crescimento da
enables us
carteira
to grow the private portfolio in the beginning of the year. We believe there's that potential, and we will monitor that during the year, during Q2, Q3. So yes, there is a potential for that. And now moving on to the second question about the impacts to the distribution center impact, not only in sales, but also in costs. I would say that in costs, we disclose that, and Daniel can remind us of that. In sales, we have the estimates, but it's really hard to set the amount because the sales have a lot of variables to them. So yes, there is an impact in the pressure that the distribution center has had with longer lead time in the beginning. And with that, we had disruption in replenishing some stores. So the product was coming in later in the fourth quarter and first quarter, and that disruption leads to loss of sales. But what the impact is, it's really hard to mention because the biggest component is the part of the collection, and there's other components like the weather issues. So there are a lot of variables in all of that to affirm what the actual impact is. But it does exist. It's something that we have to consider when we look at the sales performance. It has an impact that is perceptible. We have to consider that in costs. And as of the second half, it also has an impact that can't be ignored, improving the margins, and then we improve the redundancy costs. So Daniel, would you like to mention that? Just to add, Macruz, last year we had an evolution of that cost during the year. We mentioned 100 million BRL, and 100 million BRL was accumulated in a growing way. We ended the fourth quarter at the highest level of redundancy. So you start off the first quarter with redundancy level that is lower than Q4, but still higher than 1Q 23. It still will happen. And between Q3 and Q4, we will see a reduction that we expect year over year. So in that gradual evolution, we have to bear in mind the 100 million, and the challenge of getting the reduction that we were talking about will mainly come in Q3 and Q4. And that's what changes in what we were mentioning. So we have to bear in mind that phasing out quarter after quarter when we consider the increment last year and a gradual reduction during this year. Okay, great. Thank you everyone for your answers. Thank you, Macruz. Next question is from Luiz Guanais from BTG. How are you doing, Guanais? Can you hear us? Can you hear me? Now we can. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Carla, Fabio, and Daniel. I have two questions on my side. First of all, can you mention the evolution of volume during the quarter? You mentioned that there was a leap, even sequential, quarter over quarter with a better trend. So can you share with us the volumes, how they behave during the quarter and what we could expect looking forward? And the second question about price positioning. You've had a strategy in the past months as well of positioning assortment at a lower average price, not lowering the price, but more entry-level products that you mentioned in the release. So I'd like to understand the positioning, how it's going to behave during the year as well. Thank you. Thank you, Guanais, for your questions. The volume dynamic in the quarter continues. In the fourth quarter, we gained volume. We were having volume increase since the fourth quarter. And in the first quarter, that continued as well. We had a mismatch in some months because of events. So Carnival was earlier this year, and um, Easter was earlier, so we lost a little bit of that comparability. But if we remove the non-comparable effects, we had the same effects during the entire quarter, so we're still growing volume. So the expectation for the year is that we continue to grow volume, and logically, we had a similar expectation for Q2, and that should have an impact and pressure in that growth, given the extreme weather effects, climate effects. So the extreme heat in April and May, and the flooding that we've been facing in the south of the country. So yes, that may affect the volume growth in Q2. It should be lower than what we expected, but like we mentioned, our inventories are well adjusted. So even though we have that, and despite that, we still see room for growing margin. And I'll bring that together with your second question, with the competitiveness and price that we still have, and that enables us to gain volume and market share and growing our margin. So even with more appealing prices, we really worked on the efficiency in product development with our plant. We were able to bring in more competitive products with more competitive, more fashion, and better margins. So with the extreme climate events impact, we're already doing the math for that. That's going to put pressure on our margin as a result of the pressure on sales, but still, we do believe in margin growth because we're getting a good equation, so to speak. If we had a normal scenario, and that's what we expect for the second half, it would be growing volume with lower expenses with the distribution and less negative pressure from the DC and more positive pressure and margin growth even at competitive prices. And that what enables us to have the volume growth. Great. Thank you, Fabio. Thank you, Guanais. Next question is from Eric Wan from Santander. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking our questions. On our side, we have two. So the first one is about in-season purchases that continue to advance. So I'd like to understand what potential you see in a potential increase of in-season purchases. So what we can expect from that, not only from sales, but also margin. And going back to the climate issues in the second quarter, Fabio mentioned some pressure. So in that vision, would it be volume pressure, or should we see volume that continues to evolve, but maybe a little less than what you were expecting initially? And the same thing for margins. Thank you. Well, starting with the second part, about the second quarter, about the pressure. It's hard to say or to mention the growth for the second quarter. When I mentioned climate effects, we're going through the flooding in Rio Grande do Sul, and it's hard to say how long that will last, how long that will affect us. We have few stores closed. Most are in operation, but the traffic footfall drops. So it's a variable that's still early for us to estimate and to mention. So it's possible for us to grow volume even in the second quarter, probably at a lower level than what we had in the first quarter. Our expectation was that it would be similar, but it should be lower levels given the pressure, negative pressure. But even so, a possibility of growing volume and growing margin. About in-season purchases, moving forward, they become more relevant because when we talk about the next collections coming in and talking about future collections, we have a relevant part in domestic. Most come from our domestic suppliers, and we're ready if necessary, because it depends on the need. Up to 40% of national production would be in season and with a short in a short period, enabling us to work with renewed inventories. That's been helping a lot. Even during extreme climate adversities, we can navigate well and good renewal of our inventories and healthy margins. Perfect. Thank you for your answers, Fabio. Thank you, Eric.
A próxima pergunta vem do Vinícius
Next
Strano, do
question is
UBS.
from Vinicius
Oi,
Strano
Vinícius.
from UBS. Hi, Vinicius. Hi, good morning, Carla, Fabio, and Daniel. Thank you for taking my question. Thinking of the evolution in inventory, is there a contribution that you can highlight that was relevant for the distribution center in Cabreúva and the markdown effect and the inventories clean out that you did last year? And if you could also mention an opportunity to improve inventory with the distribution center and also the average lead time that you've been observing. And a second question, in payment method share, what do you see in terms of retail moving forward? Should be close to 29%, but what would you deem is ideal? Thank you, Vinicius. About the Cabreúva distribution center to improve inventory at this time, I would say that it's not even no, it's negative. It's been giving us negative pressure. So the new distribution center is a big lever for our business. It's a big differential, especially as of the second half. At this time, we take one step back to take five forward, right? And we'll soon do that. Right now, it's an offender. If we hadn't transformed yet, we would have better inventory turnover, better margin and inventory, and higher sales. But what's helping if it's an offender? It's helping to improve the product development lead time. We've already reduced that a lot for our collection in the quality of our products at competitive prices, and that's really helping a lot. At this time, the distribution center is still a big offender. So from the production to the distribution center at two stores, it's worse than the previous model right now. And as of the second half and in the upcoming month, it's going to become neutral. And in the second half, it will be a lever. And then in that case, it has the potential of helping not only in improving the turnover margin, but also sales. Daniel, would you like to add before I go into payment method? No, I think you've covered it all. I'm not sure. I think you mentioned everything. Go ahead. About payment method, with the scenario that we face in delinquency, and we had a serious reduction in granting credit and limits, I would say that in our vision, in our expectation, the current share of our payment methods on our sales is at a lower level than normal because we did that. That's on us. We made some reductions to contain delinquency, and now at a healthy base and an adjusted model, we can gradually increase credit granting, and that would naturally lead to a higher share of our own payment methods in total sales. So it's really hard to give you a figure on that, and we do avoid to give you firm numbers, but it will probably be higher than the current levels. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Next question is from Irma Gard from Goldman Sachs. Hi, Irma.
Nos escuta, Irma?
Can you hear us, Irma?
Obrigada, por abrir meu
Thank
áudio
you.
aqui. Eu tenho algumas perguntas. A primeira pergunta é em relação
I have
ao
some
remessa
questions.
com fome.
And
É uma discussão que já tem
the
acontecido quase
first
ano agora,
one
mas eu queria
is
saber, assim, como as últimas
about the
notícias que saíram
shipping
nas
with the
últimas
new
semanas, se
news
vocês
in the past
efetivamente veem
weeks.
uma movimentação
If you see any movement
para frente nessa discussão da isonomia dos impostos.
of the tax isonomy.
A segunda pergunta é nas despesas
And the second question in
extraordinárias
expenses,
que teve
extraordinary
na Realize, que
expenses
entendo que
that you
foram
had at
não
Realize,
recorrentes,
I believe they were non-recurring
devido às consultorias e assessorias
given
que
the
contrataram para melhorar os modelos.
consulting
Queria só entender assim, se
that
são
you've hired
coisas que ainda
to
vão
improve the models. I'd like to know if those
acontecer
expenses
agora no segundo tri, ou se
will
foi
happen
isolado no
again
primeiro tri. E a
in the
terceira
second
pergunta
quarter, if it was
sobre
just one-off in the first
sobre
quarter.
as
And the second
recuperações dos créditos fiscais que têm ajudado um pouco a mexer
about tax credit
no lado não
recovery, once
recorrente
again, that helps
nos
in
últimos tris, se a gente deveria ainda esperar mais alguma
recurring
coisa
aspects.
nos próximos tris, se tem plano para
So should we expect
também
that in upcoming
reconhecer mais alguns
quarters,
créditos
or should we
tributários.
recognize any more tax credits moving forward? Thank you.
pegar a primeira pergunta aí da isonomia. Nas despesas
Well,
extraordinárias da Realize, eu também
about
começo com
isonomy
o Daniel, e
and
depois o
extraordinary
Irma
expenses
já
at Realize, I'll
complementa
start
aí
with
para a
that,
gente
and
ver
then
os
Daniel will
detalhes,
talk
né?
about the
Sobre
tax credit
isonomia,
recovery.
né, a gente
About
também
isonomy,
tem várias ações, né,
there's many
de
actions in
várias
that.
instituições,
Many
associações, até o poder
institutions,
público, legislativo,
associations,
né,
even the government, the
em
legislature,
curso para que
and
tenha
that's
isonomia, né,
ongoing
para que os
to
impostos
have
sejam mais
isonomy so that
semelhantes, né, que
taxes
não
are
seja a
similar,
indústria e o varejo nacional pagando
so
uma
that
alta carga tributária,
national
o varejista
industry
estrangeiro
and retailers pay more
com imposto
and
baixo
foreign
no
retailers no
percentual em alguns
taxes
casos, né?
or
Para isso aí tem
lower
atualmente,
taxes
né,
when we
já
consider the
tem
state
algum
rate.
tempo para ser julgada pelo
So
Supremo Tribunal Federal uma ação de
it's
inconstitucionalidade
supposed to
da
have
Federação Nacional do
receive an
Comércio e da
opinion
Federação
from the
Nacional da
Supreme Court, from
Indústria,
the National Federation
para ser
of
julgado sobre a
Trade and the
inconstitucionalidade da
industry
isenção de
to
impostos
determine that's not
para os
a
estrangeiros
constitutional
na
aspect in
pagamento de impostos
foreigners not
institucionais,
having
né, mesmo de produtos
taxes
importados.
and
Isso vai
and
ser julgado
domestic
anualmente
players having higher
pelo
taxes even on imported
Supremo
goods.
Tribunal Federal.
So we're waiting
E,
for that
em
opinion from the
paralelo
Supreme
também,
Court. And in parallel to
o
that,
Executivo está
and
estudando,
obviously
né, não sei
the
qual a
executive
avaliação,
branch is studying that. I don't know what the
tramitando um
action will
projeto de
be,
lei,
but there's
né, que
also a
deve
bill
ser
of
votado
law that's about
provavelmente
to
na próxima
be
semana, né, um projeto
voted,
de
I
lei
think in the next week.
para
It's a
também,
bill
né,
of law
definir, né,
to
isonomia nessa questão dos
determine
produtos
the
importados, né,
isonomy
vindos de cross-border. Isso
in the
voltar,
cycle of
deve
data,
ser,
the
eu acho que
cross-border
tá, como foi
aspect.
aprovado também em regime de urgência, dentro de contexto maior, de outros
So
projetos de
there's
lei também,
also
e deve
an
ter
aspect of
votação
urgency
legislativa
for this
no início da
bill of
próxima
law
semana,
compared to
provavelmente.
others, and we
Né?
should get a vote
Com relação
next week or in the beginning
às
of the week
despesas
after that. About
extraordinárias da Realize,
the extraordinary
isso aí
expenses
não é
from
de modelo de
Realize,
crédito, nada.
it's
Desculpa, não sei,
consulting
deu barulhos aqui pra gente, mas eu espero que estejam todos ouvindo aí. Acho que sim, deu só um barulho
and
aqui.
oh,
Bom,
sorry,
as
I thought
despesas
there was some noise
extraordinárias
here.
da Realize
Anyways,
é uma
the
consultoria
Realize
que contratou
extraordinary
para
expenses
governança
is a
na do
consulting
programa
firm
de crédito,
that we hired for
junto do
collection. It's not
operacional,
for the credit model. It
e
was
ele
more about
reavaliou e decidiu
operations,
que
and
não gerava
reassessed
o
that
valor necessário, não
and
correspondia.
realized that
A
it didn't make
gente optou por
sense.
descontinuar,
So we
né?
decided to
E
cancel that.
tivemos uma despesa pontual
So
nesse
we had a
sentido,
one-off
né? A
expense in
gente
that
revisou a
sense.
operação, a gente entendeu que a gente
So we
gera
did
muito
the
mais valor
operation, and we believe that
sem,
we generate more
essa
value,
consultoria, e aí acho
will
que
generate more value without that
acabou que
consulting firm. So we
a
did the math,
geração de valor é muito positiva
and
na
value
forma como
generation is
feita
very positive
essas
in the way
despesas
that we
nesse
did it.
trimestre,
So
e
recognizing the expense in
operando
the
de uma
quarter
forma
and
mais
operating
eficaz
in a more effective
atualmente.
manner moving
Então, eu
forward.
acho que vai gerar mais valor para a Realize.
So that will
E
generate
o
more
Irma, se
value
quiser
for
também
Realize.
complementar,
And if I'm
a
not
gente tem valor
mistaken,
residual
and Daniel
que
can add to
vai
that, we
retornar
have a
para o
residual amount that
tri, mas ele é
should
residual, é um valor
be posted in Q2. It's less than this one, though. So that's been resolved, and it should be very positive moving forward. Daniel, would you like to talk about the recovery of tax credits?
Sim, algo em torno de uns 60%, Irma, foi
Yeah, I would say that
aqueles créditos
approximately
que
60% has to do with the
no
credit
final do ano passado,
that
tá?
we showed at the end of
O
last year.
resto, a gente sabe que tem várias,
And the
a gente
rest,
sabe aí da complexidade tributária do Brasil, sempre
we
tem
know
governos
the
que
tax
vão
complexity
caindo, tá?
in Brazil, and there's always
Aquela parte específica
some
maior
things
já se
that will
foi,
come. The more
daqui para
specific
frente
part
é operação
is done with,
normal.
and from now on,
Eventualmente você pode ter
regular
algumas maiores
operations.
ou menores, vão
You may
depender
have
dos
eventual
reflexos depois
higher or
que
lower
essas
amounts,
tributárias e
and
ação
there are
da realidade
many
do negócio, tá?
tax aspects that are part of doing business.
Ficou bem claro, obrigada.
Okay, thank you. Very clear.
Obrigado, Irma.
Thank you, Irma.
A próxima pergunta vem do João
Next
Soares
question
do
is
Citi.
from João
Tudo bem,
Soares
João?
from Citi.
Tudo bem, Carla? Bom dia.
How you doing, João? How you doing, Carla? Good morning.
Em relação,
Just
primeiro
two
sobre
quick
a
ones.
rentabilidade da Realize, né?
So
A gente
first of
pensa em
all, about
originação,
Realize
pensando um
profitability,
potencial
we think
mix
of
maior
origination
private
and
label,
we consider a potential higher mix in private label and
como é que tem
also
rentabilidade do negócio?
revolver
A
credit
gente vai surgir esses comentários que a contribuição poderia ser estruturalmente
legislation.
menor, né? Então
So
tem
how
esse
could it
é um debate
be
importante que eu
structurally
queria
better?
retomar aqui. O
I'd
segundo,
go back,
desculpa
like
insistir
to
no
go back
CD,
to
mas
that.
só
I'm
para
sorry
entender o
to
timing
insist on
contábil
the
em relação a
distribution center
transação e duplicidade de despesa, né? Esses
about
dois aqui.
the
Quando que a gente
duplicity and
deveria ver essa
expenses.
estabilização
So
acontecendo? Isso aqui é algo já para
when should we see the
segundo
stabilization
semestre já está
happen? Is that
estabilizado?
second half of the
E a
year? Should it
duplicidade
be
de
stable
despesa,
already? And
o longo
duplicity and
do ano, isso
expenses,
deve
Daniel
reduzir
mentioned that
gradualmente ao longo do ano,
that
mas
should
aqui deve
gradually
ter
decrease during the
ainda um
year,
valor residual
but
no
there's
início de
probably still a
2025.
residual amount
Por
in
último, desculpa te pedir
2025,
muito, Sal,
correct?
mas um último
And
ponto que
the last
surgiu
point
aqui em relação, vocês
is
comentaram no início do opening remarks ali, eu
you
entendi
mentioned
que
in the
essa
opening
questão
remarks,
que está
and
acontecendo agora, esse desastre, né,
if
infeliz
I
aqui no
understood
Rio Grande do Sul,
correctly,
isso
that
não tem
unfortunate
impacto no supply,
disaster in
né?
Rio
Isso
Grande
aqui
do
só tem
Sul doesn't
impacto
have an
nas
impact
lojas,
to
só
supply,
confirmar isso para mim.
only
Obrigado.
store traffic. Is that correct?
Bom,
Thank you.
eu vou começar de trás para frente, vou pegar a tua última
Okay, I'll
pergunta
start
ali,
off with the last one.
aí eu já
About your last
passo
question,
na sequência no CD e
and
o
then I'll go
Alexandre
to the
termina
distribution
com
center,
se
and Daniel
referir
can end
a
with the
Realize aí. Obrigado,
distribution
Daniel.
costs and
Bom,
talk about Realize. Okay, Daniel?
no Rio Grande do Sul, né, acho que quando a gente fala do impacto do fluxo de
Well,
abastecimento,
when we
lógico, a gente
talk
tem um
about
impacto
the
do
supply
abastecimento, do
impact,
fluxo de
we
abastecimento
do
nas
have
lojas,
an
né,
impact
tem
in
poucas
supply
lojas
to the
fechadas,
stores in
né,
Rio
mas
Grande do
as que
Sul. We
estão
have few
fechadas,
stores
então
that
esse
were
elemento
closed, but the
limpa,
ones that were closed are
tem
not
uma
receiving product
expectativa
for
delas
now.
reabrirem em
We have an
breve.
expectation that they will open
A gente
soon.
não tem nenhuma loja
We
com
don't have
impacto
any
relevante,
stores
né? Não
with a
temos perdas
relevant
materiais
impact. We
relevantes em
don't have
nenhuma loja.
any
Tem
relevant
algumas que a gente ainda
material
está
losses in any
esperando
of the
avaliar,
stores.
mas todas
There's
as
one that we're
outras
still waiting for
tá
the
sendo monitorada,
evaluation, but all the other ones we've
os
been able to
equipamentos todos
monitor,
foram
access all the equipment and products
foram colocados em segurança e não teve nenhuma
were
grande
stored
inundação em nenhuma das
safely,
outras
so we didn't
lojas.
have any major flooding in
Uma
any of
um
our
pouco mais
stores.
afetada, mas ainda
One was a little
não
more
com
affected,
impacto relevante. Então,
but it shouldn't have a
tanto
relevant
questão de
impact.
estoque quanto
So
materiais para
inventory
essas
losses
lojas
or material losses for our
praticamente nulo,
stores is
muito
pretty
menor,
much
quase nada.
zero, almost
Com relação à
nothing.
rede de fornecedores, nós
About
temos
the
poucos fornecedores no
supply
Rio Grande do
chain,
Sul. A
we have
grande maioria dos
few
fornecedores está em Santa
suppliers
Catarina
in
e
Rio
outros
Grande do
estados.
Sul.
Rio
Most
Grande do
of
Sul
them
a gente
are
tem
in
uma
the state of
base
Santa Catarina and other states.
relativamente
In Rio
pequena de
Grande do Sul, we
fornecedores
have
e
just a
dentro dessa
few
base de
suppliers,
fornecedores,
and within
poucos
that
foram afetados
supplier
também,
base,
né?
few
Não
were
é todo
affected
o
as
estado que
well.
está
It's
afetado,
not
né?
the
Tem muito
entire
servidor
state that was
fechado. Eu
affected.
estou
It's not
trabalhando
all
aqui
the
para
region. So I'm here, I'm
ver se
working
tem alguns
from Rio Grande do
pontos,
Sul.
né,
We're okay, but there were
bem
some
menor para
neighborhoods
os
that were
nossos
affected.
fornecedores. Então, é uma base
And
pequena
as
de
with our suppliers,
fornecedores
it's
e
a
dentro que a
small
base que a
base of
gente tem de
suppliers.
fornecedores é uma base ainda
And
muito
within
menor
this
que foi
space, it's
afetada.
still
Aí, então, isso para
small
abastecimento
part
vem
of them that were
preocupando muito os
affected.
nossos
So for product
fornecedores. Eu diria
supply
que
coming
é
from our
muito pouco, quase
suppliers, I
nulo,
would say that
é
it's pretty much
inexpressível.
zero
O que tem é o
impact.
fluxo de abastecimento do CD para
What
a
we
parte
do have
interna. Então, os fornecedores
is
demoram um pouco. As que
supply
estão
the
abertas
supply
têm
from the
um tempo de
DC to
time um
the
pouco
stores.
mais longo,
So
porque os
some are
caminhões
closed,
vêm
and the ones that
fazer
are open, the lead
trajetos
time
mais
is
longos,
longer
né?
because the
Com vias
trucks
de
have
acesso
to
obstruídas, estão
drive
fazendo
around the
paradas
flooding areas,
e
so
estão
they're
sendo
longer
abastecidos,
routes, but
né?
they are being
Só que com um time um
replenished.
pouco mais longo. E aí eu
However, they do have a longer lead time. And about the distribution center, at this time, we're in the stabilization phase. We were ramping up at the end of the year, so that led to pressure. We had cost redundancy in order to not affect the operation. And during the first quarter, we've eliminated some of the cost redundancy, and that's led to higher pressure on the DC operation. So you take away one of the protections, you overload the operation, excuse me. And then we're going to have a new ramp up of that phase. So it's a stabilization process that was planned and during the quarter. And we still have some protection, so we don't put too much pressure on the new operations of distribution centers so we can improve the curve as fast as possible. So we should improve the stabilization in the quarter. Could be a little bit before. So we have productivity level that's very good in the past weeks in the distribution center. We've broken production records in the past week, especially. And at the same time, the supply was a little more affected to the south, and that affects the entire system. But I would say that the impact is small, but it also gets in the way of stabilization. But when you consider everything all together, we believe that moving forward, the impact that was negative for sales, for supply, will become zero. And during the second half, it will become positive. For the expenses, and Daniel will talk about that again. And then after that, you can mention Realize. Okay, thank you, Fabio. Hi, João. So about the distribution center expenses, it's a little bit of what I explained in Macruz's question. So we start the year with the redundancy expenses that are higher than last year. But the idea is that we end the year, close the year operating with these expenses neutralized. So today, we don't want to carry over to 2025. And that means that when we get to Q4, the operation would be normalized. And then moving forward, as Fabio mentioned, you can bring in all the benefits that we expect from the distribution center. So operating 100% per SKU with more agility and accuracy. So that's the principle that we have today about the DC operation. About Realize, you mentioned the revolving credit. About that, we see that the impact is minimum. After all the final decisions and the conversations that we've had with you, the impact of revolving credit is very low. But the thing is that the industry dynamics have changed. So the level of profitability that we had in the past, we believe that in the future it's going to be lower because we used to talk about 20% share of the total company EBITDA. And now with the Realize operation, we believe that the potential could be from 10 to 15%, and we'll be working for it to be approximately 15%. And we can't forget that in the Realize context, that it also assists in our retail operation because it fosters credit and sales. And when you have the higher share with the Realize card, it lowers the cost of operation, the NDA that we pay for the credit card operation, so that it gives us a benefit in the retail operation. So we have to consider both. This year, we'll see an evolution of Realize. It will be positive. It has the great potential to end the year on a positive note. Many changes that Paula is making at Realize, and we believe that by working on the product and the operational changes that we're making, so we believe that 2025, moving forward, we should get that 10 to 15% share. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Fabio. That's very clear. Thank you, João. Next question is from Joseph Giordano from JP Morgan. Hey, Joey. Hey, everyone. Good morning. I hope your families are doing well in Porto Alegre. My question is about exploring the renovation for more simpler operation that you're rolling out, not only for the checkout operations, but also for the dressing room. So I'd like to know about the work that you have on expenses. So how many stores have already been rolled out to this format? What do you see in CapEx for the renovations for those stores? And second point, how does that translate? So not only in incremental revenue, but also in savings and headcount and expenses for stores in general? That's my question. Thank you. Hi, Joey. Thank you for thinking about our families. Our families are safe, the teams as well. Thank you for that. So the renovation, the remise modeling, when we talk about sales and results, it's hard to just separate one single thing. And it's hard, the comparable base is difficult because the renovation started recently. So there was a period where it was being renovated, and then you compare it to a period without the renovation. It's really hard to isolate the factors in just little time to actually say how much it would add more value to sales, but it does add value to sales. So it's been generating better sales value. It's a positive factor. And what we recently did, we tested some of the stores where we had renovations with a much lower capex and intervention time lower as well. So we can get greater volume in that. So a complete renovation when it's really necessary, when the store is either older, so it needs bigger renovation, or when we believe that there would have a significant gain because of that layout and we need more interventions in that sense. At the Center Norte shopping mall, Rio Sul in Rio de Janeiro, and the Guatemi of Porto Alegre were complete renovations, higher investment, and longer period of renovation. Barra Rio is being renovated currently. We would be selling even more. It's one of the biggest units that we have. It should be ready at the end of Q3. There's another model that we developed recently that we've used in some of the stores where we focus on what is more important in the new model. Like you mentioned, the dressing rooms, lighting, equipment, and that's shown to be very positive. We have worked in a short period of time, lower investment, and gaining in more sales. That's the model that we should have in a higher volume, and that will give us better results as well. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Joey. Our next questions are text. Andrew Rubin from Morgan Stanley. We have 3 questions. I think we already answered the second one. I'll read them. Realize is the first one. The active customer base decreased year-over-year. When you think about growth, what do you expect in balancing out the loans to customers and higher balance for the customers that have existing credit? Second one, we've seen news about the cross-border situation. Can you update for the apparel industry and how you're getting ready for that in terms of tax? And third, what visibility do you have for the CPV as we advance during the year, negotiations with suppliers, trends of inputs and exchange rate? Do you expect that the scenario will become more or less favorable in the upcoming quarters? Daniel, you could talk about credit, and then I'll answer CPV and cross-border, okay?
começo aqui falando de Realize, né? O Andrew
So about
perguntou de
Realize.
base ativa de clientes, né? O que a gente
So
espera daqui para
about
frente?
the
Daquilo que eu
active
tinha
customer base.
respondido acerca da gente tem que conseguir estar buscando
What I answered
retomar
before,
parte
we
da
have
base, por
to
exemplo,
recover part of the
de
customer base that
1,3
we've lost. We
milhões
lost 1.3
de
million
clientes, quando a gente vê aí desde o do período que começou
customers
todo
since the beginning of the
toda a
period.
questão dos problemas de crédito,
And
inadimplência
about
que a gente
credit
incorreu.
problems
O que
and
a gente espera daqui para
delinquency
frente
and what we
é que a
incurred.
gente possa
So
entrar numa vertente de
moving
retomada
forward, we
dessa
want
base de clientes.
to
Essa é a
recover that
nossa
customer
expectativa.
base. That's our
A
expectation.
velocidade disso vai depender
So the
pouco
speed of
da
that
nossa
depends
percepção
on
de risco de
our
crédito, tá? Então,
credit
se a
risk
gente retomar o
perception.
aumento da base de clientes, sim.
So we will, if
Se a
we
gente
will increase
conseguir
the customer
retomar
base,
a base
yes.
que
If
a
we
gente
can
tinha no
recover
passado,
the
vai
base that we
depender
had in the
do
past,
êxito
that
que a
will
gente vai ter
depend
no que diz respeito
on
ao
the
risco de
success
crédito dessa base que
we
a
have
gente quer
in the
trazer de volta.
credit risk that we will have
Tá?
in
Acho
that
que é
base that we want to
basicamente
bring
isso.
back. That's
Fábio.
basically it.
Eu acho que, só complementando
Fabio,
aqui, né, ele
just to
perguntou
add,
quanto vem, né,
he
de
asked
clientes
about
existentes e novos clientes, né,
new
e a questão
customers,
nova.
new grants
São ambos,
of
né? A
credit,
gente
both
tanto
actually.
tá olhando para os bons clientes que
We're
temos
looking
que
at
podem ter oportunidade,
good
né, de ter
customers that
pouco mais
could
de
have an
limite, e
opportunity
também
of
para
getting
trazer
a
também
higher
novos
credit
clientes,
limit
né? Acho
and
que
bringing in new good
esse é
customers.
o caminho. Com
I
relação ao
think that's the
cross-border, né, eu
path.
comentei já sobre
About
o tema,
cross-border, I
só
mentioned that
complementando, né,
already.
como é que a gente
Just
está se
part of the
preparando para
question
os
is,
cenários. Eu
how are
diria
we
que
getting
o
ready
cenário atual
for
é
the
um
scenario?
cenário menos isonômico, né? O cenário atual
The
é menos
scenario is
isonômico
less
e a
isonomic,
gente vê
and
já uma competitividade muito maior
and
no
we
nosso grande
see
portfólio
higher
de
competitiveness
daqui para frente,
in
né?
gaining market share. So moving
Eu tenho
forward,
falado muito segundo semestre porque
I've been talking a
a
lot
gente
about the
foi
second half
no segundo
because we
trimestre
have
e ele é
the
pontual
second
nessa
half of
questão
the year
externa do macro,
event
mas
that
mesmo
specific
assim a gente tem
and with the
uma
climate
oportunidade de ganho de share, sim, mesmo
issues,
nesse
but we
evento,
do have an
né?
opportunity to gain
Uma expectativa seria
market share
maior,
even
se a
with
gente não
this
contasse
event.
com alguns
The
eventos
expectations would have
extremos,
been
né, como
higher.
a
We
gente está
didn't
vendo
expect
aqui.
the
Mas
extreme
mesmo
event
assim a gente tem uma
as we see here,
expectativa
but we still
positiva,
have a positive
menor do que ela era no
expectation,
passado,
lower than
com
last
ganho de
year,
eficiência.
but still
Dali para
with gains in
frente, né,
efficiency.
tirando esse
And
evento
then moving
pontual,
forward,
a gente tem uma expectativa
we
também de
have
continuar crescendo
an
muito, tendo ganho de
expectation
share
of
em ambos os cenários, né?
growing, still growing, and in
Então,
both
estamos bastante
scenarios.
ajustados para
So we're
este
well
momento, que
adjusted
é o pior momento
for
da
that moment,
isonomia,
which is the
né? E
most,
acho que estamos
the worst moment in
com ganho de
isonomy,
share, né,
and we're
crescendo volumes
gaining
bastante
market
ajustados,
share,
né, e
growing
com uma
volume,
margem
well
saudável.
adjusted with a
E
healthy
qualquer cenário
margin.
diferente desse, ele
And
é
any
mais
different type
positivo.
of
Quanto mais
scenario is
isonômico
even
for
more
o cenário,
positive. The more
maior vai
autonomy we
ser
have
o
in this
impacto.
scenario, the higher the
Com relação
potential.
ao custo dos produtos vendidos e a margem, a nossa
About cost of goods
expectativa
sold,
ela continua sendo
the
positiva.
margin
A gente,
expectation is still positive.
nesse cenário, a gente sempre tem, até nas nossas
We,
importações, a gente faz
even
hedging
in our
delas,
imports,
né?
we
Então, tudo
hedge
que a gente
them.
compra, a gente já
So
sabe,
everything that
né,
we
qual é
buy,
o
we already
preço que a
know
gente pode comprar, que
what
pode vender.
price
A gente não
we
está
could buy it,
sujeito
we
a
can
grandes
sell at.
variações
We're not
cambiais.
subject to
Então,
major
estamos com um
FX
cenário bastante
variations.
estável nesse
So
sentido
our
e
scenario is very
com
stable in
uma
that sense,
margem maior, né,
with a
com
higher
possibilidades,
margin
alguns dependendo do trimestre,
and margin growth
um
depending on
crescimento
the
um pouco menor, um
quarter,
leve crescimento, mas acho que
maybe
uma
higher
expectativa de
or lighter
crescimento de
growth,
margem,
and
mesmo,
expectation
né, com um cenário que pode
of
ser mais
margin
competitivo
growth
ou não,
even in a more
e
competitive
mesmo com essa
scenario
questão
or not,
pontual nesse
and
trimestre. Então, acho
even
que é um
with the
cenário
specific case
positivo
in this
para
quarter.
frente.
So it's a positive scenario moving forward.
A próxima pergunta é do Pedro
Next
Tineu, do
question
Safra.
is
Tudo bem, Pedro?
from Pedro Chineo from Safra
Bom
Bank.
dia, pessoal.
How are
Obrigado
you
por
doing?
pegar a nossa
Good
pergunta.
morning. Thank you
Eu
for
tenho
taking our
duas.
question.
A
I have
primeira, eu queria
two.
explorar um
So the
pouquinho mais a
first
questão
one, I
da
wanted to
cobertura da
explore
carteira, tanto do cartão Renner
the
quanto do meu cartão, porque
portfolio
ele
coverage,
passou a
not
bater
only
um
for the
pouco mais de
Renner
cem por
card,
cento,
but
né,
also
agora
Mail
está em
Cartel that
90,90.
exceeded
Acho que já fazia um
the
tempinho, né? Acho que desde
over
2022 que
90.
ultrapassava.
And
Se você
since
pudesse comentar um pouquinho da
2022,
dinâmica
it
desse
hadn't
nível de
exceeded that.
cobertura
So tell us about the
até
dynamics
hoje.
of that
E aí a
level of
segunda,
coverage of the portfolio.
pensando
And
aqui
the
em
second one,
alíquota, pós, né,
thinking
todas
of
as questões de impacto de MP,
the rates
se
and
a
after
gente
the
pode
impact of the
pensar para os
provisional
próximos
measure
trimestres
for the
uma
other
mesma
quarters,
dinâmica
next
parecida
quarters, can we
com o que
consider the
foi feito em
same
termos de JCP
dynamic
e de alíquota por conta
for
da
interest
subvenção.
on
Obrigado, pessoal.
equity and a tax because of the subvention? Thank you, everyone.
Daniel, pode pegar essa.
Daniel, you can answer that one.
Oi, desculpa, eu só cortou um pouquinho da alíquota da subvenção, Pedro. Você podia só repetir? Eu perdi o da alíquota.
So can you mention that part of the rate for the
Só para
grant?
entender melhor, Daniel, se o
I'd like to
patamar que a gente
understand
já viu
better
nesse trimestre
if the
deveria
levels
ser
that we
nos
saw
outros três.
in this
Ótimo,
quarter
ótimo.
should be the same as the
Obrigado,
other
obrigado
quarters.
pela
Oh,
pergunta.
okay,
Vamos
okay.
falar dos dois aqui. A melhora de
I'll talk
cobertura
about both of
é
them.
tão simples quanto o fato de que a gente teve
Improvement in
melhora da carteira.
coverage is as simple as the fact that we had an
Falou,
improvement in the
a gente tinha
portfolio.
falado que o fato de
So you had mentioned that the fact that we had a part of the portfolio that had
maior de over 90
more over 90 gives us a reduction of the coverage. And when you see a reduction in over 90, the coverage improves. That's as simple as that. So when we talk about the grant levels, yes, because we lost the deferred and that's already reflected in Q1.
Perfeito, obrigado.
Perfect, thank you.
E aqui, indo para a nossa última pergunta, então, da cota, dado o tempo que nós estamos aqui,
So
é do Gustavo Sendai, da XP.
we have the last question from Gustavo Sendai from XP. How are you doing?
Pessoal. Obrigado pelas perguntas. Eu tenho só
Good morning, thank you for your
follow-up na
question.
questão do clima, talvez. Se vocês
Just
puderem
to
comentar
follow up
pouco,
for the climate
não
issue,
tocar
can you
no
mention
impacto aqui em volumes aqui no primeiro tri, mas comentarem um pouco das alavancas que vocês de repente já fizeram uso para tentar
how about the
mitigar um pouco
levers that you've already used to try
crescimento
to
por esse risco,
mitigate
de
the
repente
issue?
abaixando um pouco o preço ou mudando um pouco o VM das lojas, né, trazendo alguma coleção em season um pouco mais pesada. Enfim,
And maybe
puder comentar um pouco das
something,
alavancas que vocês já fizeram uso para mitigar um pouco desse impacto seria excelente.
so
Obrigado.
the levers to mitigate that impact, that would be excellent to hear that.
Gustavo, a gente, como a gente falou no começo ali, a gente está com um trabalho muito melhor, né, de desenvolvimento.
So like we
de software
mentioned in the
velocidade,
beginning, we have
que nos permite, né, trabalhar com
better
uma
development in
mais
terms of
ativa
collections and
e
speed,
ser
having leaner
uma
inventories,
coleção mais
and
in
therefore
season,
the
né?
collection
Além
is
disso,
more
a
in
gente
season.
também tem visto, né, clima mais
We've
quente em geral.
also seen warmer
A expectativa
weather
era
in
essa, então
general, so that was already the expectation. It was even hotter than what we expected, but we already knew about that, so we were ready for that.
Para esse tipo de clima. Então a gente tem uma coleção mais assertiva para essas condições, né? Eu diria que
So more assertive,
mais assertiva. Acho que isso que
leaner,
permite que mesmo
newer,
com
and that enables us,
desafios na questão
even
climática,
with some
a gente
challenges in the
possa,
climate change,
crescer e cresceríamos ainda mais se não fossem
we could
essas
grow
enchentes, né? Acho que a gente possa mesmo assim crescer, né? Mesmo com esses desafios, mesmo com calor e com
even
perda
with
de
the
margem.
challenges
Então, acho
and
que
growing margin.
toda
So
essa melhoria que a gente teve no nosso
all the
processo de
improvements that
desenvolvimento
we have in
é o que
developing the
permite
collection
que, apesar do
enables
clima
us that
adverso,
even though
a
there's
gente pudesse
adverse
estar trazendo, né,
weather,
crescimento em volume e crescimento em
we
margem.
can grow volume
O
and grow
fator que
margin.
realmente não estava na conta é a pressão atual ali, pontual
What
da
wasn't
questão das
part of the
enchentes,
math
né?
was the
Esse
specific
que
issue with the
realmente é uma
flooding.
adaptação
That was
a mais
something
ali, mas
that we have to
fora
adapt
disso,
to.
acho que a
But
gente
besides that,
vinha mesmo com um clima não favorável, acho que o nosso modelo responde
so
bem
even with
aos desafios
unfavorable
que
weather, our
vamos ter.
model
Então, sim,
responds well to the challenges that we will
está
always have.
preparado, ágil,
So
flexível
we're ready,
para
agile, and
apresentar melhores
flexible
condições em
to present you with the best
clima.
collections in any weather.
Perfeito, obrigado, pessoal.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone.
Bom, com isso, a gente encerra
Well,
a
with
sessão de
that,
perguntas e
the
respostas.
Q&A session is now
As
over.
eventuais perguntas que não
And
tenham
if
sido
any
respondidas
questions
antes,
were not
o nosso,
answered
né, a área de
during the
RI
call,
está totalmente à
the
disposição. Por favor, nos
Investor
encaminhem.
Relations Department
E,
is
Fábio,
at your
algum
disposal.
comentário
Send us the
final?
questions. Fabio, any final remarks? No, I was just like to thank you everyone for your attention, for participating, and we are available if you have any questions. And I'd like to reiterate our support to the local communities in Rio Grande do Sul. And we are also available to anyone and everyone that would somehow look to help. On our side, in operations, in generating value, we are very confident that we are going into a very positive cycle, as we have mentioned for a while. Even with these one-off events that could happen and did happen in this case. Even in that case, we are confident in the evolution of profitability, generating value with specific pressure on sales at this time, but still, even with growth. And after this, we get through this, we will have growth, profitability, gains in efficiency. So we're working and we trust that we will have a very positive scenario moving forward. Thank you, everyone. And we're available if you need it. Thank you.